Hello. Today we will spend some time talking about community-based psychological first aid, a program developed by Dr. Gerard Jacobs, Professor Emeritus at the University of South Dakota. Community-based psychological first aid is not intended to be a substitute for therapy or mental health treatment. Rather, it is designed to be a practical guide that emphasizes personal skills that anyone can use. We will answer the following questions. What is psychological first aid? Why should it matter to me? What are the components of psychological first aid? What is active listening? How can I become a better active listener? What should I do if my skills aren't enough? And lastly, how do I make a referral to a mental health professional? The following information regarding community-based psychological first aid has been generously provided by Dr. Jacobs with the Disaster Mental Health Institute in collaboration with the University of Mississippi's Clinical Disaster Research Center. To begin, what is psychological first aid? Psychological first aid helps participants use the skills they already have more effectively to provide basic psychological support to family, friends, and neighbors who have experienced a stressful event. One of the key factors in community-based psychological first aid is the community aspect. This tool is designed for everyone to be able to use. Community-based psychological first aid can be scaled up to address extraordinary, large-scale events, as well as scaled down to address day-to-day stressors. We all have skills, but when we are presented with a problem, sometimes it's not easy to fully engage our resources. This program is designed to take those skills, for example, the ability to listen to one another and provide validation in a welcoming way, and use them to help build psychological resiliency, or the ability to effectively handle stressful situations of all sorts. Now we will begin to talk about the components of community-based psychological first aid. As these concepts are discussed, think about how you can use them throughout your everyday life. An essential idea, first and foremost, is to develop the attitude of being a helper. You do not have to be interested in going to medical school or becoming a therapist to have a helper's mentality. In fact, one of the main components of community-based psychological first aid is learning to assist those around you with meeting their basic needs in times of distress. To be a successful helper, it is essential that you are approachable. Do you generate warmth and compassion? Are you engaging? Or do you tend to be more reserved? If someone around you is experiencing distress or in need of physical support, to what extent are you able to recognize this? To what extent are you able to act on this awareness? Consider all the ways you can learn how to be a helper in your day-to-day life, helping someone pick up their pen when it falls in class, holding the door open for the person walking into your building, or even checking on that person who seems a bit down after a test. Cultivating the mindset of being a helper takes time, but it is an attitude that can help both you and your community in times of stress. For CBPFA to be utilized, either traumatic or everyday stress must first be present. Dr. Jacobs describes traumatic stress as ordinary responses to extraordinary experiences. These traumatic stressors can range from large-scale natural or technological disasters to individual emergencies or crises like house fires, car accidents, death, or illness among one's family or friends. Examples of day-to-day stressors that may be experienced include a poor grade on a test, arguing with a friend or significant other, or work-related stress. As human beings, we are connected to the people around us, be they friends, family members, or even classmates or neighbors. Learning how to be there, to be truly present, to be available to talk through these problems is a practical way of supporting one another in times of stress. This is one way that resilient communities are built. After a traumatic or daily stressor occurs, it is common for us to talk to those around us, our friends and family members, for instance, about our circumstances. However, we have learned that often, despite our best intentions, we are not as good at listening as we may think we are. We can always learn to be better listeners. It's so easy for us to become distracted by the world around us when talking with someone, but through practice, it becomes easier for us to lean in, to focus and devote our attention to the person and situation at hand. Community-based psychological first aid uses the Best Ears model to teach active listening skills. The Best Ears model includes both nonverbal and verbal active listening components. Body language, eye contact, space, touch, and time comprise the nonverbal components of BEST. Encourage, ask questions, restate and rephrase, and summarize comprise the verbal components of EARS. Now we will go over each of these components in more detail. As we do so, intend to brainstorm practical ways of using these techniques when conversing with someone in a time of stress. Beginning with body language, when talking with someone, think about what kind of body language lends itself to being encouraging and supportive. Try to relax, refrain from fidgeting, and focus on the individual in front of you. This takes mindful intention and practice. Next, E is for eye contact. In mainstream U.S. culture, eye contact is expected and communicates both respect and attention to the listener. However, this characteristic may not have the same meaning cross-culturally, so when talking with another person, be mindful of the level of eye contact they are willing to make with you, then match that level. Space includes the subcomponents of distance, position, and orientation. Position relates to whether the individual is standing or sitting. Orientation refers to how the person is facing, directly towards you versus partially or completely facing away from you. Distance concerns the individual's personal space and how much physical distance is comfortable given your relationship. For example, a close friend or family member may be more comfortable with your closeness than someone you just met. Mimicking this body language is especially important when interacting with those of different cultures, as mainstream U.S. expectations may be very different and could make the person uncomfortable. When in doubt, try to match the person you are talking to. Remember, this takes mindful intention and practice. The first T in the BEST acronym stands for time. Simply being there during times of stress is critical. If a person is simply present and willing to support an individual, psychological support can be provided without ever talking to someone. It may seem cliché, but one of the most valuable things we can offer someone is our undivided attention. Additionally, if someone is confiding in you, share the burden. Being an engaged, committed listener is essential. Lastly, the second T, referring to touch, completes the nonverbal aspects of active listening and is one of the most important considerations when using community-based psychological first aid. Touch can be a very powerful and comforting tool, but it can also be damaging if done poorly. If during the course of the conversation we think physical touch may be appropriate and helpful, be it a pat on the back or a full-out hug, this is something to consider, but make sure to ask the person's permission first. Body language, eye contact, space, touch, and time comprise the nonverbal components of the acronym BEST when thinking about active listening.